All right, turning now, another mass shooting, another debate on guns. But now in Michigan, the focus is on the state's open carry law. It allows anyone with a concealed pistol license to openly carry a gun in schools. And there are currently two bills in the legislature that would change the law. One would allow only concealed weapons to be carried in schools. The other would ban all weapons. And again, we have these conversations that come out after these shootings. And first, I just kind of want to step back and say the reaction I think that people had to the shooting in Oregon, or I think almost maybe my point is the lack of reaction. It feels like that we are really, this is becoming so commonplace that it's not even as disturbing as it used to be. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think we're becoming accustomed to these things happening, and that, in the short term, is an issue, right? It's not the long term problem, but we've had a bad run of it, where there are more mass shootings right now than there have been in recent years. There's a new website that tracks mass shooting and defines as 3, I think, or 4 or more. There are many more of them now than there used to be. But I think again, you know, crisis sometimes inspires bad policy making. We need to think bigger than just mass shootings. I mean, we have a gun problem in this country that kills thousands and thousands of people every year, and even single killings of people in urban areas, and especially, is a huge problem. We need to have more rational gun policy in this country, and it's really hard to get to that space when you have two extremes, one saying you can't regulate guns at all, the other saying that the Second Amendment doesn't mean anything. I mean, I think both of those are absurd policy positions, but we got to come to a practical agreement that does better.
So what is a rational and practical
I don't know. I mean, there's a contradiction here, and I think, again, if you only focus on guns, you're missing the point. I mean, certainly this attack was carried out with guns, but if you look at murders by firearms since 1993, they peaked, and they're down 50%, while multiple shootings continue to happen. Some years we have more, some years we have less, but they certainly are more common than they once were. So what's going on here, and are there other issues we should be taking a look at, including mental health and other elements of our society? You mentioned open carry. I've written a couple columns that, as a Second Amendment supporter, strong Second Amendment supporter, I think it's just plain stupid for people to be openly carrying weapons into schools, because you put a lot of pressure on school administrators to determine, oh, is that just a guy exercising his open carry right, or is that somebody who's going to come in here and shoot up the school? It's insensitive, it's stupid, and it's hurting their cause, I think, because it is going to lead to more restrictions. And, you know, but you just can't get through to these folks that carrying a rifle into a school is not a good idea.
Well, what about the Democrats' bill making gun-free zones? It's truly gun-free.
Well, I mean, you had a gun-free zone here in Oregon. What happened? I mean, you can
Actually, I
layer
think that was not a gun-free zone. It was just a community college where you can't have guns. Yeah.
Well, I mean, how far do you want to extend?
Well, I mean, there's no school or campus where that allows you to carry a gun.
This was a gun-free zone, and it didn't seem to help. So, I mean, you can layer on a lot of feel-good legislation. Some of it may help a little. Most of it probably won't. But as long as there are 300 million guns circulating in this country, I don't know how you end gun violence.
And there's some people making the argument, though, that if you were able to have people, though, have guns in that kind of situation, they could defend themselves.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean,
the security guards certainly should have had a gun.
Security guards probably should have been armed in that situation. But the idea, I mean, we are very enamored right now in America with myth making.
What do you mean by that?
Well, this idea that if you arm everybody, or arm more people, that we would be safer, which cuts against you know, the logic that plays out in every other civilized country on the planet. I mean,
well, that's not true, but we can get to that.
Well, it certainly is true. There's no other Western society that has the number of guns in circulation that we do.
Sweden, Norway, Finland all have higher rates of multiple shootings than we've had in this country.
But they don't have higher rates. But they don't have higher rates of violent crime or murder than we do, or homicide. And almost all of those things in this country are committed with guns. And so to pick out just the mass shootings and say, well, that's somehow different, is cherry picking. And again, that's
those
myth-making.
countries have high gun violence rates, high murder rates.
They do not have high murder rates compared to the United States.
They also have very strict gun laws. I mean, our gun violence rate of violence by guns has been going down for murders. It's 50% down for murders. It's 75% down for crimes committed with a weapon.
It also depends on where you live.
We are going in the right direction.
If I live in the city of Detroit, is it down? If I live in the city of Baltimore or New York is in the recent years doing better. Chicago's out of control.
Chicago has the toughest gun laws in the nation, and it's out of control. Which goes to my point: layering on more gun laws is not necessarily going to end gun violence.
My point is that the idea that more guns will lead to more safety is not just irrational. It's crazy. It's insane. It is saying something that does not bear out anywhere else on the planet. So you'd have to think that there was something peculiar or special about people in this country that would suggest that somehow if we arm ourselves more than we already are, more than 300 million guns, that somehow we keep ourselves safer. That just doesn't make any sense.
There's also a myth that more gun laws will keep us safer, because that hasn't proven true either.
Alone they may not.
So here's the proof. Here's our rational conversation. And so what do we bring out of this? And how does it impact Michigan?
I mean, I sit on the opposite side of the Second Amendment question from Nolan. I think, number one, the way it's written is not the way it's interpreted. I think we ought to interpret it very much true to the words that are there, which would allow for a lot more regulation of guns, something that we had for 150 years in this country under the Constitution. And all of a sudden we decide now it means something different, and that it's okay to say, well, you can't regulate it the way that we have. I think that's where you start. But I also think that you do have to go beyond that. I mean, I think you have to deal with the practical reality that there are 300 million guns in circulation, and you don't want to have the situation where the cops, don't have guns, but the criminals do, or the legal gun owners don't have guns, and illegal owners do. You have to talk about it in totality and in some context, and not get stuck on one part or the other.
I think we've got to drill down and figure out why we are such a violence-prone society,
sure.
And I don't think that is necessarily because we have access to guns. We pound our children now from almost 2 and 3 years old upwards with violent images, and we glorify violence in our culture. You look at today's movies compared to the movies of 30, 40 years ago, and the gore and the violence and the glorification of gun violence is greater than it ever was. That's a bad combination, with the fact that there is a gun in every house in America, just about.
All right, and we'll see where these bills go in the next couple of weeks.